Okay, so I have been doing a deep dive on YouTube lately. Part of me says I'm really wasting my time. What I should be doing is household chores, right? And the other part of me says perhaps God has a higher purpose for me. Because we're talking about abuse victims. Abuse victims are not just girls. Overwhelmingly, we hear about, oh, girls are being groomed and they're being raped and everything like that. But sometimes things happen to boys too, and boys can't talk about it. And if they end up having antisocial personality disorder, then we say, well, it's their fault because they're just a bad kid. Well, case in point, and I feel bad about it. On the one hand, how did it take me decades to understand I, as a Christian, might have been a friend to somebody that I saw experiencing bullying in high school? Now, this was, my dear friends, this was long before people, you would hear the slur gay being thrown out occasionally. But it wasn't something that we brooded upon in our culture. Anybody who was awkward was teased, well, at least in this one school that I went to. I became acclimated to a certain school after having been moved around a few times as a kid. And then, of course, it's the watershed moment for me, and I keep bringing it up. Let's not be in denial. The watershed moment was my parents' divorce. It was a really horrible thing because I'm drop shipped into the middle of, Afghanistan or something. These kids are just brutal and they're really mean. At first they seem friendly, but when they realize you're not one of them, they're just, something turns, like the worm turns, and they just become brutal and mean and start bullying you and targeting you. And like, what did I do? I'm only myself. What did I do? I'm sure that wasn't God's plan. But while this was happening to me, there was a young gentleman in my grade, and this grade, I was age 10 and 11 during this grade. Can we just say it that way? Okay. So I was a prepubescent child. I was pretty young. Maybe I should be like a housewife and have 3 children in Afghanistan by now, but fortunately I wasn't born in Afghanistan. Da 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 ching. It wasn't officially Afghanistan. It was actually a place in America. This kid, we had gone from living in really a beautiful house with some woods, acreage, and sometimes I would wander in the woods as a little child and I would just appreciate the beauty of nature and everything like that. But everything changed with the divorce. Suddenly we're moving into a trailer park, and there are very nice trailer parks. I'm not putting trailer parks down. There were many nice people in this particular trailer park, but there was sort of a dark side to this trailer park too. And one of the kids who was my classmate, I think he might have been a little bit older than 10 or 11. He just seemed like he was a little bit older, but he seemed a little bit mentally not quite there. He had this nice blonde hair, curly blonde hair, and he just dressed a little bit 1970-ish. He just seemed to be a bit of a throwback to the 1970s, but he really seemed to not quite be there. He seemed to be mentally fogged. And people picked on him, and I never ever went to his defense. Because you get so conditioned when you live in the gulag. I don't want to, offend anybody by using that term. You become so conditioned, even if you're the one being abused, you rarely stick up for the other person being abused because you're so focused on yourself. And didn't the educators and the principals turn a blind eye? Didn't they? They must have seen the bullying that was happening. To me, there was this one kid that used to chase me around the classroom while my teacher was out on a smoke break or whatever. When we're talking about a smoke break, we don't know which kind of tobacco we're talking about, but I'm sure there was a teacher's lounge and it was a smoke-filled room, I can tell you that. Like any time when you were in the early 19 or mid 1980s, did you ever perchance have to like take something to the teacher's lounge and it's just like this a smoke-filled room? Okay, well, that's all I have to say. Not accusing one particular teacher, not to say he was any worse or any better than the rest. In some ways he was better, in some ways he was a little bit lackluster. He should have seen that as every day I went to school, every morning. This particular kid, I don't know if he had a crush on me or something, he would bully me, chase me around the classroom. What? We didn't have cameras in the classroom back in the day. I think that some of these people envisioned school as a zoo for children because children are uncivilized, so let them just be animals. Oh, I'm sorry, but Mr. Darwin, I beg to differ. Darwin died doubting his own theories, by the way, that we evolved from a certain ape species. And, there's a certain term I'm not even allowed to use on YouTube, but I would say this is not referring to the people I knew who aped out. Most of the time in my life, they were my fellow white people. Supposedly, I'm one of their fellows. I don't know. But they used to say the meanest things, and it even continued on into high school. There was a young lady with platinum blonde hair, but she had glasses and she was rather nerdy. And she was relentlessly picked on by a certain other female who just hated her for another white female who hated her for absolutely no reason. And I was always friendly to the nerdy people and the outcasts, but I never stuck up for them. Now I regret that very much. So now you have a perspective from me. Does it count for anything? I certainly hope that it does. Why do we blame people for having, say, nerdy mannerisms? There was another, my goodness, the abuse I experienced in public school was so awful. And as I have said, teachers, administrators, they turned a blind eye. Did they have a desire to see people being mentally tortured? I don't know. Did they get some secret enjoyment out of that? Or was it just the omerta? We don't intervene when we see a student being bullied. There was a girl that had epilepsy in high school. I think I was about 14 years old. I had experienced some horrors in the cafeteria, believe me. Not due to epilepsy, but this girl, she apparently suffered from epilepsy, and she had a grand mal seizure right in the middle of the cafeteria, right in front of the whole class, whoever was in my lunch period in high school, and she was foaming at the mouth and just twitching and obviously going into a seizure, and the paramedics came to pick her up. And everybody just stood around and kind of like laughed, like, oh, she looks like such a dork. She's having a seizure. What is wrong with you people? I mean, something similar happened to me, but I didn't have a seizure. But it's like, what is wrong with the way we're raising our children? Could it be the vaccines? I wonder. I don't know. I don't know if it's my mother's smoking habit that, put too much carbon monoxide into the uterus while I was still in utero. I don't know. And obviously, it wasn't wrong back in the day to drink and smoke while you're pregnant because they said, well, these substances, they never cross the placenta. Actually, it's perfectly fine for you to do whatever you want to do. Now, my husband and I have discussed this a few times. We didn't turn out to be as, well, some of us didn't turn out to be as tall or as intelligent or as successful as our parents. And we wondered, is it the food additives? And I always have to, wave the white flag. If you really think that marijuana is helping you, here I am to say is, all I can say is, I don't know, in utero, what were you subjected to? Because Nirvana does in utero. And I used to read about when I was pregnant, it's very dangerous to smoke marijuana when you are pregnant because the developing child inside of you will end up having, it's a very stressful event for them. They will end up having a meconium bowel movement. You're not supposed to be pooping in utero. I don't think I pooped in utero. I'm sure my brother didn't. But they talk about the COVID vaccine, how it could be harmful to people, etc., how it causes them to have blood clots, etc., etc. Even some of the drugs that were prescribed for my elderly father, I didn't realize they were actually possibly harming him. And they're just handing him out like candy, like it's Halloween, here, trick or treat, take. What? Quietapine was actually not good for an elderly person? At one point, I actually stopped giving my dad those pills. I don't know, maybe it was the Holy Spirit. It's not that he was always normal before he got old, but my brain said, hey, you should give him these pills. These pills will help him. But these pills that they're handing out like candy are not necessarily helping people, my dear friends. And as for, I know a lot of people are very marijuana friendly these days, but I can tell you I had an encounter with a younger gentleman. I don't know, would have been about 8 months ago? I'm not sure. I'm not going to name his name. I say younger because he is younger. He started saying some really weird things to me. I'm like, what? Like, how could you? That's just a total lie. He started talking about my brother, like some of my children were my brother's children. Like, what kind of a weirdo says that? That's got to be a demon inside this kid. I said, you know what? Jesus loves you, but I think you're a schizophrenic. He just nodded his head. Well, I am so sorry, but cannabis and paranoia and schizophrenia are linked, and bipolar disorder. I'm not a mental health professional. Some people say that it helps them. If it helps you, then that is so wonderful, but don't assume that it's going to help other people. And I still wonder to this day if perhaps some sort of autism occurred, some sort of brain injury occurred. Could be due to my mother's really unrestrained consumption of alcohol while I was in utero. It could have made my brain a little bit abnormal. I don't know why that's my fault. I don't, is it my fault any more than it's somebody who has epilepsy's fault that they have epilepsy and they have grand mal seizures and everything? My mother was tall, she was strong, she was intelligent, she was beautiful, she was successful. It seems as if every generation gets just a little bit more diminished, doesn't it? I remember my mother had to even go to the hospital. We had to call 911 for her to go to the hospital because she was smoking. She was a teacher at the time. Apparently she had pleurisy, which is like too much mucus in your lungs, and she was just an avid smoker. I don't know what that did to my brother. He had a lower birth weight than I did. I remember one of our neighbors made fun of him because, he was born with such a small head. He has a low birth weight. I don't know what my mother ever did to this person that lived up the road, but I know that their dog kind of stalked me and tried to kill me. At least I felt like he's trying to kill me. He had like a Charles Manson look in his eyes. Does anybody relate to anything that I'm saying? Of course not. Everybody thinks you're absolutely crazy. No, not everybody thinks I'm absolutely crazy. But there would be this sort of, before of course we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers, except for very primitive Ataris, and the Atari computer. I got a computer. Sure I did. But hearing that this mean lady had said that about my brother, well, he has a small head. Why did this woman hate my mother? I don't understand that. Why did she see my mother as a rival? I mean, we're not very close neighbors, but we lived in generally the same neighborhood. And for the most part, I really do believe that my mother endeavored to do good in her life. Originally, she was in a nursing school, in a Catholic nursing school. I can't tell you what school it was, but the Mother Superior or somebody, it wasn't like climb every mountain in The Sound of Music. It was almost the opposite. She wanted to attend her grandfather's funeral, and the Mother Superior said, "Oh, you can't. You're not allowed to do that." And so my mother, disheartened, dropped out of the nursing school, which was run by Catholics. And then she went to a secular school. And then she got into the sorority. And all kinds of underage drinking and promiscuity were being encouraged in the sorority. It's very sad that happened to my mother, because I think she wanted to be accepted. That's the thing. People want to be accepted. Because of things happening in her childhood, her also being bullied or ostracized. At one point, she just decided she was going to really be liked by the popular people, and she would do anything she could just to be liked by them. That's a compromise, and I don't think she ever was able to get away from that, because the need for acceptance is so profound in the human being, the need for acceptance. And of course, I would listen to my mother's music. The Eagles she loved the Beatles, but the Eagles, particularly after my parents' divorce, and they subsequently did get remarried just after a few years, the Eagles were her go-to people. But she also liked Billy Joel, and she liked Kenny Rogers, and she liked everybody. I don't know what to say. She liked Lionel Richie. Everybody my dad hated, my mother loved, right? And I remember my dad making the comment, Billy Joel, he's actually German. I'm like, well, he just doesn't look German to me. Oh, no, he's not really German. Yeah, okay. We got it. He's non-observant, but he's not a German. Like, Dad, something doesn't seem right about that. Why do you keep claiming Billy Joel as part of your tribe? Because I don't think he is. But my mother really loved the Eagles. And I would listen to the lyrics very seriously as a little girl, just not really having like a lot of kids to play with in my neighborhood, at the time. After we moved out of the trailer park, I said, Mom, what does it mean the Greeks don't want no freaks? What does it mean the Greeks don't want no freaks? I don't know, maybe this is before we moved to the trailer park, and Mom would play that whenever Dad wasn't around, when he wasn't playing his classical music. My mother was playing the things she wanted to play. Kenny Rogers, Anne Murray, the Eagles. My dad poo-pooed anything that was hippie-ish at all. Oh, Bob Dylan too. My dad only wanted to play classical music. I guess he was trying to be a good influence when he was around, The Greeks don't want no freaks. I said, Mom, what does that mean? The Greeks don't want no freaks. She said, oh, it's about secret, fraternities and sororities in college. And you listen to the lyrics, they're kind of inappropriate for anybody really to listen to. Mother, are you celebrating what happened to you? Is this how you're dealing with what happened to you? Because I feel as if you were taken advantage of. I think you were put into a secret society and you went through rituals and you were degraded, and that's the way it goes. The Greeks don't want no freaks is a very, very, what shall we say? It's very schadenfreude. You laugh at terrible, bad experiences which happened to you. I don't even want to recommend that song for anybody. And yet, that's what I listened to even when I was a little girl. I said, Mom, what does that mean? What does that mean? Oh, please tell me what it means. Okay, Eric, I'll tell you what it means. But I say, of course we like to watch our Christian television. We do. But how can we just keep covering up this abuse which has been happening systematically generation after generation? I remember reading a book by Laura Ingalls Wilder about her. She would write biographical novels about her own husband's upbringing and how they had a one-room schoolhouse, and that, the husband, Almanzo Wilder, they had that, basically they'd, pay a teacher to temporarily teach the students in a particular village or someplace, up there in the Northeast. And there were these really mean boys that just, every time a new teacher would come in, these mean teenage boys, they're white boys, as far as I know, by the way, they would beat up any teacher. They would run them out of town on a rail. There was this one particular male teacher that he got like a bullwhip. You know what a bullwhip is? I don't like to hurt animals with whips. Please tell me that you believe me. That was the culture back in the 1800s. And this guy, he seemed like a wimpy little teacher, but one day he had decided that he had had enough, and he brought a bullwhip in and he whipped those bullies until they were bleeding and screaming and running out of the school. I just love it, you know? You just love it. You love it, you love it, you love it, you love it. But to be or not to be, that is the question, as Shakespeare said. It's not, violence is not necessarily the answer. Sometimes it's just speaking out. Sometimes it's repenting and realizing I could have helped people, and I stood by and I watched others get abused. I didn't know what to do. I didn't say a word because I was so conditioned. I was so brainwashed not to stick up for somebody else. Now, not all of us are courageous people. That is correct. Why are some of us timorous? It could be because of our early childhood experiences. We realized it's better to, we weren't encouraged to speak up. I just have to say, whatever you've done, Jesus can forgive you of your sins. But the good thing to do would be to, first of all, stop any ongoing abuse that you're aware of. Do everything you can to stop it. Whether it's abuse of boys or girls, or the Bible says whatsoever is hidden will eventually be revealed. Maybe the time for things to be revealed is now. Thanks for listening. Adios.